All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, gang. So today, for this video, we're going to be talking about the Aztecs. Well, why don't I just do this the easy way and show you what we're going to be talking about. Boom! There we go. Boom! So, as always, double boom, boom. We're going to start with the key terms and hard words. Again, it's going to be from this list that I'm going to be picking and choosing terms that may or that will potentially appear on your midterm exam. Also, as we're getting into languages that I'm not quite familiar with, I am probably going to be referring back to this simply because sometimes I just can't pronounce things. So today we are going to be talking about the Aztecs. Dun, dun, dun. We're going to talk about the rise of the Aztec Empire and the Triple Alliance. We're going to look at Aztec government, Aztec religion, and Aztec society. So when we're talking about the rise of the Aztec Empire, first and foremost, we got to talk about where do they come from? Where do they come from, and what is their region of political control? And so for this video, boom, we're going to go a little further north from where we were discussing the Mayans, and focus around Lake, or what's called Lake Texcoco, right here, and what is known as the Valley of Mexico, which is where modern-day Mexico City is located. Well, sorry, skipped ahead a little bit. So the Aztecs, they refer to themselves as the Mexica, M-E-X-I-C-A. The group that will become the Aztecs were originally a semi-nomadic tribe from northern Mexico / the southwestern United States, who migrated down to the Valley of Mexico. So it would be all the way, keep going past this map, way, way, way up north, but they would migrate down to the Valley of Mexico in the mid-13th century CE. So we're looking at about 1250 CE or so. What this means is that by the time they arrived to settle into the Valley of Mexico, there were already 5 large city-states in the area that pretty much had their own sort of spheres of influence. And so what the Mexica did, what the future Aztecs did, was they settled along the shores of Lake Texcoco and began to assimilate into the culture of the region, particularly in this area. There we are. This area around here, and through intermarriage with this large city-state of Culhuaca. There we go. So they arrive about 1250 CE. They settle in this area on the southern coast and basically lived under the protection of the large city-state of Culhuaca. And for the Mexica, this period of peace lasted approximately 75 years before they would be expelled from Culhuacan land for deifying or making the daughter of the Culhuacan leader into a goddess. Because the Culhuacan leader, well, he sent one of his daughters to rule over the Mexica. It's like, hey, you're in the area I control. I'm going to send my daughter over there to basically keep you guys under control. And the Mexica said, hey, this is great. Do you mind if we make your daughter into a goddess? Now the Culhuacan leader went, okay, this is probably just a simple ritual, and this would be great for me because if my daughter is a goddess, that means technically I'm a god, and who would not want to be a god? So he said, yes, I'm sure it'll be a simple ritual, and my daughter will be returned to me unharmed, and this will tie the Mexica closer to my control. What ends up happening is, well, the ritual called for the sacrifice of the daughter, and according to legend, When the high priest returned from the ritual, he was wearing the skin of the daughter. Needless to say, the leader of the Kowalkans was just slightly upset at the ritual sacrifice of his daughter. And the Mexica escaped the justifiably upset Kowalkans and fled to the western shore of Lake Texcoco. So they fled away from this area. Granted, not too far away, but they fled to this area here and settled their new city of Tenochtitlan on the western shore of Lake Texcoco in 1325. Now, if you remember the last video, just to provide some context of where we are, if you look at the eastern part of the map, right here, this would be where Teotihuacan is. So as I said, it's not too far from modern day Mexico City. Now, how were the Mexica able to survive this? I mean, they have a seriously pissed off large city-state who wants to basically wipe them off the map. Well, the Mexica were able to build up their power base by hiring themselves out as mercenaries for the various city-states in the region. By doing this, they not only bought time and allies to prevent retribution from Kowaka, but they also brought financial security and prestige for their city. And what this allowed to do, and the city's going to be right there, what this allowed the Mexica to do is it allowed them to expand the city, which included absorbing other nearby Mexica settlements, again, Mexica, M-E-X-I-C-A, and secure its position within the hierarchy of the entire Valley of Mexico. It also helped that between 1376 to 1425, Tenochtitlan was a vassal state, was under the protection of another large city-state known as Azcapotzalco. Before you worry, Azcapotzalco. Holy crap, I pronounced it right 2 times in a row. Azcapotzalco, 3 times. Azcapotzalco. Azcapotzalco was a rival large city-state of Kowaka. And things went pretty well as far as vassalhood went. Tenochtitlan would provide tribute to Azcapotzalco, and Azcapotzalco would provide protection. Now, the good times, they lasted until the new leader of Azcapotzalco, whose name was Maxla, decided to tighten his grip on his vassals, as well as the other city-states in the region. And this occurred after a rather messy succession crisis in Azcapotzalco, where the various city-states who were vassals had to pick sides. Do you choose Maxla or do you choose this other potential successor? Unfortunately for the Mexica, unfortunately for the future or the people we would call Aztecs, Maxla came out on top. And so Maxla had the leader of Tenochtitlan assassinated, while the leaders of the other cities were forced into exile, basically trying to cut off the head of the leadership to bring Tenochtitlan under his iron grip, because Tenochtitlan chose the wrong side. Now, here we go. So we've basically just talked about where the Aztecs come from. They came from southwestern United States, northwestern Mexico, down to the Valley of Mexico. We've talked about the rise of Tenochtitlan coming from being initially a tributary state of Kowaka before moving settling and creating Tenochtitlan and being a tributary state for Azcapotzalco. So now we're going to talk about this right here, the Triple Alliance. Because as a result of the actions of Azcapotzalco, city-states began banding together, coming together, working to secure new leadership within the Valley of Mexico. And the key alliance, what would become the Triple Alliance, the key alliance against Azcapotzalco would be Tenochtitlan, located right here. It would be Texcoco, located on the east coast of Lake Texcoco, and it would be Tlacopan, located just across the causeway from Tenochtitlan. And so between 1427 and 1428, the Triple Alliance waged war against Azcapotzalco and emerged victorious. Now, interestingly, the Triple Alliance decided to forego direct rule of the conquered states. That is, they did not come in, conquer a city, and say this is a Mexica city now. But rather, they decided to allow the former elite to remain into power. Obviously, that didn't go. That policy did not include Maxla, who happened to be executed after they took over Azcapotzalco. But what happened is they allowed the former elite to remain in power. And so what they did, rather than directly controlling these city-states that they conquered, was that they set up a tributary system whereby all the conquered lands, all the city-states they conquered, would be held by all three of the Triple Alliance: Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. Tenochtitlan and Texcoco being the two larger city-states within the Triple Alliance, would each receive 40% of the total tribute, while the smaller city-state, Tlacopan, would receive the other 20%. So what they did is, let's say Saskatchewan. So let's say Moose Jaw. Let's say Moose Jaw, Estevan, and Prince Albert created a Triple Alliance. And they went out throughout Saskatchewan and started conquering the larger city-states. So Prince Albert and Moose Jaw, being the larger of the two, I believe, would say conquer Regina, and they would allow the local elite, so Michael Fougere and the city council, to remain in power, provided they provide tribute to this Saskatchewan Triple Alliance. And so Moose Jaw would receive 40% of the tribute, Prince Albert would receive 40% of the tribute, and Estevan would receive 20%. And so if this Saskatchewan Triple Alliance went out and conquered White City and Saskatoon and so on and so forth, every city-state would be allowed to have their elite to remain in power as long as they provide tribute to the Triple Alliance. And so the Triple Alliance, starting in the Valley of Mexico, located right here. So again, Texcoco, Tlacopan, Tenochtitlan formed the core of the Triple Alliance. But the Triple Alliance would expand its reach outside of the Valley of Mexico over the next 90 years. And each subsequent conquest provided additional tributary kingdoms to the Triple Alliance, with the tribute continuing to be split along the same lines. 40% Tenochtitlan, 40% Tlacopan, 40% Tenochtitlan, 40% Texcoco, 20% Tlacopan. And as the Aztecs expanded from the Pacific, down here, to the Atlantic, up here, the Mexicas, still based in Tenochtitlan, began playing a more important role within the Triple Alliance. The leader of the Mexica began being referred to as the eldest speaker, similar to the idea of first amongst equals, if you're familiar with Roman history with the first triumvirate or the second triumvirate. But Tenochtitlan started having a more dominant voice amongst the Triple Alliance, being seen as the elder speaker or first amongst equals. By the time the Spanish arrived to Tenochtitlan and Mexico, or what will become Mexico, in 1519, Tenochtitlan had an estimated population of about 20,000 people. Contemporary Spanish letters suggest that Tenochtitlan was larger than the Spanish cities of Cordoba or Seville. And modern estimates suggest that within Europe, only Constantinople, Paris, and Venice were larger than Tenochtitlan. So Tenochtitlan is not an insignificant city-state by the time the Spanish arrive. The Triple Alliance will fall apart in 1519, between 1519 and 1521, when the Spanish under Cortes will arrive in 1519. I'm going to go more in depth when I talk about New Spain in Mexico in a later video, but I'll just briefly mention what will happen. So Cortes and his conquistadors will ally with the Aztecs' enemies. For example, the Tlaxcala Confederacy located here, the Confederacy of Teotihuacan located here, and using those allies. Again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the Tlaxcala Confederacy said, hey, we do not want to be eaten by the Triple Alliance, so we're going to use the Spanish to help us take down Tenochtitlan. And Cortes was able to subdue Tenochtitlan through a combination of ally making. For example, the anti-Aztec forces contributed between 100 and 150,000 troops. So a combination of ally making, starvation, and disease. The Spaniards were helped by an epidemic. In 1511, 1512, there was an epidemic of monkeypox, a disease similar to smallpox that decimated Tenochtitlan and the surrounding area, with upwards of 50% mortality in the city, with the survivors severely weakened. So 1511, an epidemic comes and with upwards of 50% mortality in Tenochtitlan. So if you go back to contemporary letters saying, hey, there are 200,000 people here, that means that only 8 years earlier, before the epidemic, there would have been, 300,000 people in Tenochtitlan. So again, not an insignificant city. Now, Cortes, once he takes over the city, will order the entire city leveled and rebuilt around the Spanish style, with designated areas for the indigenous population on the outskirts of the city. Now, unlike the Mayans we talked about in the previous video, the Triple Alliance, or the Aztec Empire, if you will, was centered around Tenochtitlan. And once the city fell, along with the death of Moctezuma II, the emperor, so too did the empire. The tributary states began falling to the side. I mean, think about it. If you are located in, I'm not even going to try pronouncing it. If you're located down here and you hear that Tenochtitlan fell, well, why are you going to listen to the Mexica? Why are you going to listen to the Aztecs? And so the tributary states started falling aside, although most of the city-states will retain their culture, at least temporarily. Whew, so that is the rise of the Aztec Empire and the Triple Alliance. So let's talk a little more about what things were like with the government, with religion, and with society. Now, as I mentioned, the Aztec Empire was controlled from the center by the Triple Alliance with a number of tributary states. And how the Aztec controlled or managed to maintain control over such an area was through indirect rule, or what political science and historians refer to as a hegemony. Hegemony. And what this means is it means effectively indirect rule. That is, the Aztecs don't directly control each and every city-state, but rather they kept the ruling elite in control of the conquered city-states and only removed them when the leader of the city-state did not properly pay tribute. Now, the Aztecs did not directly control these tributary states, but rather steered the direction of these states through economic means and threats of force. Pardon me. So if, for example, and we'll talk about economics in a second, if a city-state did not do what the Aztecs suggested, well, there was a couple of ways. The city-state could be temporarily cut off from the trading network throughout the Aztec Empire, losing economic or putting economic pressure on the city-state, or threats of force. The Aztecs could bring together a military force and simply march on the city-state without actually invading it. Now, what the Aztecs did do is they assigned stewards, stewards, stewards to every tributary city-state to ensure the collection and the tabulation of tribute. And what would happen is one steward would be located in the city-state to collect tribute, and a second steward, a partner, would be in Tenochtitlan to tabulate and store the tribute. So there would be, let's take Tuxpan, easier for me to pronounce, supposedly, located right here. So this city-state would have a Aztec steward located in there. He would collect the tribute and make sure it's tabulated properly. You've given us a proper amount of tribute. He would ensure the security of the transport to Tenochtitlan, and then his partner in Tenochtitlan would then tabulate it and make sure the proper tribute arrived. So that's how the Aztecs and the Triple Alliance governed this area. So it's sort of foreign/domestic policy. Whoops. Now, what about the government of the Aztecs and the Triple Alliance city-states themselves? What did city-state governance look like? Well, Tenochtitlan and the other Triple Alliance city-states, Texcoco and Tlacopan, were each ruled by a hereditary dynastic leader, with leadership often flowing from father to eldest son. The elder speaker, the emperor, for lack of a better term, of Tenochtitlan, was advised by a council of 4 nobles who would provide advice provide advice on ruling not only the city-state itself, but on the empire as a whole, and advised the emperor on military advisors. And each leader of a city-state believed that they were representatives of the gods, and therefore each ruler ruled by divine right. So as you go up the tributary ladder, as you go from further out towards Tenochtitlan, Each leader would claim to be the representative of a higher god in the Aztec cosmos, with obviously Tenochtitlan claiming to be the representation of the highest god in the cosmos. Which brings us to Aztec religion. Great segue into Aztec religion. All right. So the Aztecs will engage in more rituals. The Aztecs were, just like the Mayans, very ritualistically focused in their religion. They, just like the Mayans, believed in a covenant, believed in an agreement between God and gods and man, and therefore the ritual was very necessary to ensure that this agreement was fulfilled. And the Aztecs will engage in more rituals involving human sacrifice than the Mayans, but the sacrifice depended on the god and depended on the rituals. Lesser rituals would involve blood from chickens or goats or other animals, while larger rituals would require human sacrifice. For example, during the dedication of the Great Pyramid in Tenochtitlan, this happened in 1487, at least 10,000 people were sacrificed to consecrate this temple. Now, the reason there's an emphasis on blood sacrifice was this god right here, Quetzalcoatl, the god of civilization, god of order. He is the top god in the cosmos. The origin belief is that humanity comes from the blood of Quetzalcoatl, and therefore the blood sacrifice, whenever someone is sacrificed, their blood is going back to Quetzalcoatl. So we have this cycle of, it's not so much rebirth, but it's this cycle whereas life comes from Quetzalcoatl to humanity, therefore life would return from humanity to Quetzalcoatl. And militarily, this meant the emphasis on sacrifice, especially human sacrifice, meant that much of their warfare was focused on the capturing of prisoners, more so than the European warfare of killing your enemy, killing everybody who comes before you, which is going to be one of the reasons why the Aztecs, even though they had many more men than the Spanish and their allies, were not as successful militarily. Again, we'll talk more about this in a future video when we discuss Spain actually coming into this area. So there are so similar to the Mayans, similar to other Mesoamerican civilizations, the Aztecs were polytheistic. And there were 4 major gods, all of whom were worshipped and had temples in Tenochtitlan. There are more than these 4, but these are the 4 major ones. We have Tlaloc, the god of rain, the god of fertility, the god of water. He preferred the sacrifice of children and had 3 major festival periods. The second major god was Tezcatlipoca, the god of destiny and god of fortune. And his festival period will occur in May, and this is a wonderfully hedonistic, at least for one person, festival. Because preparations for this festival started the previous year, when a single young man was selected and feted as a god for the rest of the year. Throughout this year, he would marry 4 women and spend the last week of the festival dancing, eating, singing, doing other things. And at the end of the festival, the young man would be brought to the top of the temple where he would be sacrificed, and a new victim would be selected for next year's festival. I'm going to skip Quetzalcoatl for a second and talk about Huitzilopochtli. Huitzilopochtli was the patron god of the Mexica, patron god of the Aztecs. And during his festival months, worshippers fasted while preparing an edible statue of the god out of honey and seeds. And at the end of the festival months, the statue would then be eaten. And as with other gods, this festival concluded with human sacrifice. Now, for this human sacrifice, again, I should emphasize it's more blood sacrifice than human sacrifice, because if you are in the festival months just in your neighborhood, you're not going to sacrifice your neighbor. So you'd probably sacrifice a chicken or a goat or another animal. Now, Quetzalcoatl, god of civilization and god of order, again, believed to be the creator god of man, and he brought forth mankind through his own blood. So therefore, blood plays an important role within Aztec religion, and sacrifice plays an important role with religion. Now, for the larger sacrifices, for like the 10,000 people being sacrificed to sanctify a temple, these are often going to be prisoners from other areas. However, for human sacrifice, like Tezcatlipoca, oftentimes the people who are selected, if they're Mexica, they or within the society, will go along willingly, because they are going back to the creator god. So it's not like you're going to be clubbed on the side of the head as you're walking down the street, dragged to a temple, chained, and then having a knife plunged in your chest. For the most part, and blood sacrifice has made an interesting paper topic. If you're interested in it, I highly suggest going for it. There are sources out there dealing with it. But for the most part, within the Mexica society, it tends to be welcomed rather than reviled. Here we have Tlaloc on the left, my left, your right, and Tezcatlipoca, at least a mask, a representation of him on my right, your left. And on my left, your right, we have Quetzalcoatl and Huitzilopochtli on my right, your left. Which brings us to Aztec society. And within Aztec society, I'm going to talk about the basic division in Aztec society, and then I'm going to also talk about economics. So within the Aztecs, we've talked about politics, we've talked about religion, we've talked about society and economics. And the basic division within Aztec society was between the nobility and the common man. And what you find within Aztec society is almost like a feudal system. A feudal system that you will find in Europe, for example. You would have common folks who would work the land. They would deliver tribute to the nobility, generally in the form of crops. And the nobility, they would provide tribute to the nobility, generally in the form of crops, and would provide military service to the nobility, while the nobility would provide a level of protection for the common folk. And the common folk were allowed to own and manage their own land. Economically, the Aztec society was based on a market system. Each neighborhood within the major city-states had a major market, which allowed almost everyone access to bring their goods to market. I apologize. I have a phone call. I will pick this up in a second.